This year, we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Diocese of San Jose, and I want to thank Father Kevin for being here. And I think it's kind of funny that here is a Mexican priest interviewing an Anglo priest on the Hispanic ministry. Even before the Diocese of San Jose was established, there were Anglo priests who committed their lives to serve the Hispanic community. You being one of them, you have been a priest for 40 years. And my question to you is this. Well, first of all, when you got ordained, you didn't have to work with the Hispanic community. That means that you had to learn Spanish, you had to learn about the culture. So my question to you is, why? Why did you choose to serve the Hispanic community?
Well, the origins of my desire to serve the Spanish-speaking really are college years. Because in my sophomore year of college at the seminary at St. Joseph's at that time in Mountain View, I was involved with a project for Latino kids in downtown San Jose in the Gardner neighborhood. And I had another seminarian companion, and we had after-school programs and weekend trips for kids who lived in the barrio who rarely got outside the barrio. So it was a way to try to expose them to a larger world, and we provided a recreation center for them in the evenings for high school kids. And I really, I just loved these kids, but I was so frustrated I couldn't speak to their parents because they were all monolingual, Spanish-speaking, recent immigrants. And even though I was studying Spanish, I just couldn't master the language. So I decided at the end of my sophomore year that I was going to take a year off from the seminary and go to Mexico City on a junior year abroad program at the University of the Americas. So I went down there for 8 months, and I lived with Mexican families, and I studied at the university, and I learned Spanish pretty well. And I just really loved the Mexican culture, especially the focus on family, how important extended family is, something we don't see a whole lot, in the United States. And so based on those two experiences, working with the kids in the Gardner neighborhood, which is near Sacred Heart, and then living in Mexico and having a lot of Mexican friends, I made the decision back then, I was maybe 19 or 20, that I wanted to devote a good portion of my future priestly ministry to the Spanish speaking. So that's how originally I became interested. And then when I was ordained in 1980, because the personnel board knew that I spoke Spanish, they sent me to Morgan Hill to St. Catherine's because Joe Milani, the pastor, didn't speak Spanish, and he requested a Hispanic priest. So he ends up with this, Anglo-American. And as I arrived at his room at St. Catherine's, first words out of his mouth, he didn't even say hello. He said, "Kevin, the entire Hispanic community is yours.
You're in charge."
And he did put me in charge. I really became pastor of a third of the parish my first day on the job as a parish priest, which was, it was a challenge, but it was a great opportunity to develop a whole bunch of skills I probably wouldn't have developed if I had only done traditional parochial vicar, kind of ministry. So that pretty much solidified my commitment to Hispanic ministry. And then when I went off for doctoral studies, upon return, Bishop Dumaine asked me to head up a team that had already been formed to establish the Institute for Leadership and Ministry for the diocese. So people like the great Ann Gritch and others were on my team, and we designed an institute, the ILM, which was fully bilingual, fully bicultural, and of course Ann became the first director, and Sandra Torres was her associate, and it was extremely successful. So it was another way of moving Hispanic ministry as well as English-speaking ministry to a new level in the diocese.
As we look back to all these years, 40 years of the Hispanic community, there have been a lot of changes. And I think that now we have a lot of leadership, a lot of people in leadership roles and in the decision-making process. Can you name some of the key people or movements or religious orders that you consider were essential for this development within the Hispanic community?
Yes, the one who comes immediately to mind is the great pioneer of Hispanic ministry in the Santa Clara Valley, and that's Father Don McDonald. He was a seminarian at St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park in the 1940s, and he became painfully aware of the vast numbers of migrant farm workers, almost all Mexican, who were receiving little, if any, pastoral service from the Catholic Church. So I don't think they taught Spanish in the seminary in those days. He taught himself Spanish. He was a great linguist. And then he began teaching other seminarians, and they established a Spanish table at the seminary. And there was a good number of seminarians who were really idealistic and really wanted to work with those who were kind of on the margin. And that's what happened. And some of the most legendary priests in the early days of Hispanic ministry in the Archdiocese of San Francisco came from that Don McDonald movement. Mm-hmm. You know, people like Monsignor John Coleman, Father Goody, Larry Goody, Bob Moran. I can name a number of others who, really owed that part of their vocation to serve the Spanish-speaking too.
Was Father Mateo Chidi one of them?
Father Mateo was the next generation. He was a little behind me.
Okay.
So then Father Don was assigned to St. Joseph's in Mountain View when he was ordained in 1948, I believe. And he immediately began organizing Hispanic ministry far beyond St. Joseph's Parish throughout the valley. And Archbishop Mitty then assigned him and 3 other priests to what he called the Spanish Mission Band. And they were really legendary. These were heroes to so many future generations of Latinos and ministers who worked with them. And so Father Don was put in charge of the Santa Clara Valley. One priest, entire Santa Clara Valley, thousands of Mexican migrants. And one of the first people he met when he began to establish a site, which is now Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, was Cesar Chavez. And Cesar Chavez and his wife, became very close to Father Don, and Father Don began training Cesar in the papal encyclicals on labor and social justice. And when you read the stories of Cesar Chavez's biographies, he always gives credit to Father Don McDonald for launching him on the path that took him eventually to establish the United Farm Workers. I know people who spent summers with him. One of my good buddies, John Parr, would spend his summers going with Father Don. They would go out to the camps, the migrant camps around the Santa Clara Valley. They'd be out there all day. Father Don would be hearing confessions out in the fields. He had an altar set up on the back of his truck, celebrate Mass for the folks. He'd bury the dead himself. He got a license to bury the dead so they wouldn't get ripped off by morticians. And no offense to morticians. But I mean, he was just truly extraordinary. He moved a church, I think it was an old Protestant church, across town to what is now Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it is the parish hall at this point. And he established Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, which became the center, really, of Hispanic ministry in the Santa Clara Valley, and has remained so until this day under your leadership.
Yes, I think the parish hall, which has the name of Father McDonald, that was the old St. Martin of Tours church.
Oh, it was Catholic, actually.
Yes, it was Catholic, yes. Okay. St. Martin of Tours.
Yeah. So he's the first name that comes to me. Then after Father Don, just kind of thinking chronologically, I think of the Franciscans who took his place here at Guadalupe. In 1961, Father Antonio Soto came, then Father Ray Flores. They were highly regarded in the Latino community as really empowering the Hispanics and the social causes that were so important, like unionization and immigrant rights. And then the next people who come to mind would be the Misioneras Eucarísticas de la Santísima Trinidad, the sisters from Mexico who came to the diocese in 1968, and they first went to Sacred Heart Parish on Willow Street. And I was the music director of the parish at that time as a seminarian, and that's when I was also working with the Latino Youth Project. And so I met those first 3 sisters, Sister Conchita, Sister Esperanza, Sister Catalina. They were marvelous. And they immediately started empowering the movements that were so key to the development of Hispanic ministry in the 60s. Movimiento Familiar Cristiano, Encuentros Conjugales, Cursillos de Cristiandad. The sisters would regularly have the leadership formation in their house, because we really didn't have facilities outside of parishes at that time. And they were loved, and they still are to this day. They're still here, in the Diocese of San Jose. And these movements, Christian, especially the cursillos and the encuentros, they became the seedbed for most of the leadership, I think, in the parishes, throughout the diocese. So the misioneras had a big impact on the development of those leaders.
We have one of the sisters, Misioneras Eucharisticas, working here, doing her ministry in Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Sister Gisela.
Gisela Enriquez.
Yeah, she's been in the diocese 30 years.
Yes.
She's done great work beginning in Santa Catalina. So just thinking chronologically, the next person who comes to mind is Father Tony Mcguire of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. He established the first diaconate, it might be the first diaconate program in the country, and it was for the Spanish-speaking, and it was located here at Our Lady of Guadalupe. And some of the most well-known deacons, through the last 40 years went through that program. Deacon Phil Marquez, Sal Alvarez, Bruno, what was Bruno's last name? He worked with the mortuary. And well, anyway, I think many people remember him.
I wasn't born then yet.
You weren't born then, that's right. And then around the same time, Father Tony Mcguire established the Centro Pastoral for Santa Clara Valley. There was no diocese at that time. And it became the kind of the central force for leadership training in the Hispanic community and coordination of the various ministers, priests, religious and lay, and the movements that serve the Spanish-speaking. He was followed by Father Richard Garcia, later Bishop Garcia, in I think around 1977. And he continued that work, and then he was replaced by Sisters Gloria Loya and Ana Maria Pineda about 1980, and that's when I was ordained. And since I was responsible for Hispanic ministry in Morgan Hill, I worked very closely with them. They used our parish for some of the formation programs. Father Jose Rubio was just south of me down in Gilroy. So he and I were closely collaborating in Hispanic ministry at that time. And I realized, following the model, the kind of Tony Mcguire and Don McDonald and Gloria Loya and Ana Maria established, their passion was to form people, to multiply themselves, not just do everything themselves. Right. So when I was in Morgan Hill, I established the Consejo Pastoral Hispano. And it had representatives of all the parish ministries, liturgical and educational, catechetical, and representatives from all the diocesan ministries. And we became then the group that planned, evaluated, and carried out a ministry for the Spanish-speaking in South County. It was a great experience for me, and I got very close to so many of the leaders at that time, and I was so impressed by the two sisters who ran the Centro Pastoral. And at that time, I was working also quite a bit with Father Mateo Schiri, who was the parochial vicar of Most Holy Trinity, and then he became pastor of Sacred Heart, kind of legendary pastor. And he was really regarded by the local media, especially the San Jose Mercury News, as the spokesperson for the Diocese of San Jose. It's amazing, every time something happened in the Catholic Church, they went to Father Mateo, especially anything related to Hispanic ministry and anything related to Catholic social teaching. The last person, there's many others, I'm leaving out so many people, but I do need to mention Bishop Dumaine, because Bishop Dumaine was in the seminary in the 50s, just after the Father McDonald era, but he was strongly influenced by Father McDonald, and he always called Father McDonald one of his heroes. And so in the seminary, he became very close to a Mexican seminarian. He'd go to his house for vacations, learn Spanish language, and he was extremely supportive to the ongoing development of Hispanic ministry in the diocese. And of course, he spoke fluent Spanish, so he could, connect, to the Spanish-speaking community.
I remember those years. Those are the years when I joined the diocese. I was a seminarian. And one thing that I remember and I carry still with me was the excitement of the diocese, of the new diocese, and this a beautiful spirit of working with the Hispanic community. And I remember very well that the motto was not only to be a voice for the voiceless or for them, but for them to have their own voice. And I remember that was very, very strong. And that's when we started also the encuentros. And I just remember the beautiful spirit, and there was a lot of excitement and people finally finding their own voice and being supported by the structure of the church.
Yeah, I remember when you came to the diocese, you were like 19 years old,
Exactly.
something like that. You didn't speak a word of English.
That's correct. That's correct.
And look at you now,
Still.
with gray hairs.
Yes. There has been a lot of, in regards to the Hispanic community, working in social issues. And from the past, I can think of the farm workers movement, just last year working with DACA. And can you identify some of the major issues, the most important issues that the Hispanic community is dealing with? And do you believe that the Diocese of San Jose is or has responded to these issues? In which way have the diocese responded to these issues?
Well, you mentioned DACA, and I'd say the first area where the church is involved and needs to be even more involved has to do with the undocumented. I mean, everybody knows there's maybe around 12 million undocumented people in the United States. Most of them are Latino. And they pour billions of dollars into the Social Security system. They get no Social Security benefits. This is one of many examples of the injustice of this present stalemate with Congress and the President, who have not been able to pass a comprehensive immigration bill. So I think we need to do whatever we can to continue supporting the movement toward a realistic and intelligent and compassionate immigration system. So for example, this DACA, this is like almost a no-brainer. You have kids who were brought here very young, who don't even know the countries of origin of their parents, and yet, according to the law, they should be deported. You know, kids who've been here 20 years, 25 years, gone through all the educational system here, supporting our economy in very major ways, and to say that they should be deported, I mean, it's just beyond common sense. So I think we need to do everything we can to encourage our citizens, Latino and non-Latino, to do what we can in terms of voting for people who will have intelligent, compassionate policies for our country, and especially continue to support the DACA kids. Another area has to do with family life and family life and mental health issues. You know, every community, every language group and every ethnic group has to confront alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addiction, and Hispanics seem to really be hard hit, as hard as any other group. And as we know, alcoholism and sexual addiction are often regarded by recent immigrants as shameful. And so they often fail to seek help. And families paralyzed by shame and lack of information about resources like 12-step programs, therapeutic intervention, counseling, they often live for years without addressing painful, debilitating issues that affect the family. And, you know, serious marital discord and domestic violence frequently result in every culture. But Hispanics are particularly vulnerable because so many of them are primarily Spanish speaking, and the resources are primarily in English. It's very hard to find 12-step groups in some areas that are Spanish speaking. So I strongly recommend that parishes with Hispanic populations support the establishment on their premises of Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon for the families of alcoholics, perhaps Narcotics Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, and literature about these recovery programs should be made readily available. In my confessional at St. Lucy's when I was pastor, I had stacks of pamphlets about AA, Al-Anon, Marriage Encounter, you know, all the groups and interventions that are helpful to people with these, you know, issues. And I have them in English and Spanish. And I would recommend that the parishes really make these wonderful, especially the 12-step groups, make them welcome in their parishes and promote these programs. Another area in terms of social issues and mental health issues has to do with superstitions and occult practices. Now, Hispanics have no monopoly on the market in terms of occult practices. I mean, just look at all the New Age people. Most of them are Anglo, who they believe in crystals having powers, and they have their channelers, who channel spirits. I mean, this is an epidemic all around. And we find it very prominent in the Hispanic community. Hispanics are often vulnerable to brujas, to witches, psychics, fortune tellers, card readers, self-proclaimed healers, many of these curanderas, who do not have the gift of healing and who promise relief, from family problems, curses, diseases, demonic attacks, and at very high prices. Sometimes we're talking about thousands of dollars that these charlatans charge. This is an epidemic in the Hispanic community, and priests who work with Spanish-speaking, get reports regularly about these very disturbing experiences that sometimes are demonically connected, but very often they're simply psychological. But who do these people go to for help? They go to una persona. I hear this all the time. Fui a una persona que me hizo una limpia. These limpias, these so-called healings, these are frauds. These are just frauds. And so who can help these people outside of the Catholic Church? I mean, a lot of Protestant churches are trying. Some of them actually do provide some help. But what we need are teams of priests with lay people who are trained in terms of healing ministry and deliverance ministry to provide the responses that are so desperately needed in the Hispanic community who are affected by these occult practices and superstitions. And there's one final point about that. I've discovered, because the diocese asked me to get involved in this ministry even before Father Gary was named exorcist. So I've met with several hundred people who claim to have demonic attacks, and most of them are probably they're certainly not possessed, and a lot of them just need someone to listen to. But many of them do have spiritual issues. They are oppressed by spirits, and I find most of these people are not really closely connected to the church. That's not a coincidence. And so what I have done, and I think Father Gary does and others who work in deliverance ministry, we use deliverance ministry as a way to evangelize. Because these people, they're not going to church, they're not going to confession, which are the two main ways to protect yourself against evil. And so we do a lot of catechesis and evangelization through the deliverance ministry. And I'd like to see a lot more of that done around our diocese, and especially priests getting involved after some training.
Our diocese during these 40 years had been blessed with 3 wonderful bishops. And each bishop has supported the Hispanic community in different areas. And Pierre Dumaine, Bishop P.J., Patrick McGrath, and now Bishop Oscar Cantu. And I know that Bishop Oscar Cantu is very much interested in social issues, and not only interested, he's very involved. And one of the areas that I keep hearing him that he's interested is in education, and he truly believes that Catholic education should be for all, especially for those families who cannot afford it. And so I just think that we are blessed as a diocese to have right now a Mexican-American bishop who not only understands, but who really cares and who wants the Hispanic community to keep moving forward and to find their voices and keep fighting for their rights. And so I just think that we are blessed with that.
Yes, and we don't have to convince the bishop of this at all. On the contrary, he, from personal experience, is really, he's up to date on these social issues.
Yes.
And I'd like to see him, there's a couple of areas I'd like to see, as looking forward, to how we're moving, how we could move into the future. I'd like to see him use his excellent education. He has a doctorate in theology. Mm-hmm. He's a very fine teacher, very effective in English and in Spanish. I've heard him preach, many times, and he can be spellbinding. I mean, he's really good. But right now he's so focused on evaluating, reorganizing the diocese, developing new structures, which is important, and I think that that has to become stabilized before he can perhaps focus on another area. But I'd like to see him, as soon as possible, move in the direction of a wider education and evangelization in the local church. And this is not just for the sake of personal enrichment, of Catholics. It's for the culture, because everybody who's listening to this video knows that we are terribly fragmented in our culture, in almost every area. The political system is almost broken in Washington. There's so much bad blood between conservatives and liberals, and Republicans, Democrats, and some between some religious groups. The Catholic Church is uniquely situated to bring people together. I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of being Catholic, is this communion, this universality. The problem is that there has been poor formation of our Catholics, and that's why so many have left. So many have left because they didn't really ever know their Catholic faith, in the first place. There's been very little evangelization of this very agnostic and atheistic and secular society today. Now, one among several bright lights is Bishop Robert Barron and his Word on Fire ministry. I mean, he is reaching, I think now he has 1.5 million people who follow him on Facebook. Tens of millions have downloaded his videos. I follow him pretty regularly. And almost every 2 or 3 days, he's got a new video. It's amazing, the material, not just he, but his team. So he has been very smart about finding very bright people who are really committed to their Catholic faith and knowledgeable and formed in their Catholic faith and formed spiritually, to create this team now, which is affecting the whole, not just the United States, but the world beyond our country. And I'd like to see Bishop Cantu, on a more modest level, do something like that, because he's qualified. He's got the vision. He has the formation to find really well-educated Catholics, mature people who are mature spiritually, and really start doing some serious brainstorming and planning about how to provide much more deep theological formation to our Catholic people, spiritual formation, and equally important, reach beyond the church. We do very little outreach beyond the church to this. I mean, I constantly come in contact with young adults who are agnostic. They're very cynical about Christianity, about Catholicism. So many are kind of looking toward Buddhism for spiritual support and encouragement, and Buddhism has a lot to offer, but it doesn't have Jesus Christ, and it doesn't have the depths of transformation that Jesus and the Catholic tradition offer. So I'd really like to see him mobilize the resources personally in the beginning. I think it needs a person like Robert Barron started off as one person. Now he has this very large team, that he has formed.
There is a saying in Spanish that says, "Soñar no cuesta nada." Soñar no cuesta nada. So what you're saying brings me to my last question, and that is, in 10 years, if you were to look at our diocese, and specifically from the Hispanic community, what kind of church would you like our diocese to become? And you who know the Hispanic community so well, and all the values and what they bring into the Catholic Church, how would you see the church in 10 years from now?
So
Recuerda, soñar no cuesta nada. Okay. Vamos a soñar.
Okay, looking forward. I referred to the unique capability of the Catholic Church to bring people together. In its best incarnation, the Church has always been a unifying influence in society, beyond its own walls. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the Church of Santa Clara Valley really having an impact on the present divisiveness. We have very little communication among the different cultural groups. I've spent a lot of time now as pastor of multicultural parishes And so we often had a big Vietnamese community, big Filipino, big Hispanic and Anglo, and now we have more Africans coming in. And I think we can do a lot to help those communities within our churches break down some boundaries. And break down boundaries between Republicans and Democrats, you know, Biden people and Trump people, and by getting deeper into our Catholic identity, you know, which transcends all those divisions. But that requires, you know, serious formation and spiritual renewal. And one way to begin is to help the clergy model that. Because in the history of the church, you look at the ecumenical council, like the Council of Trent, for example, and those early councils during the patristic era, they did not have an impact on the universal church until the clergy bought into them, until the clergy had gone through their own renewal. In the case of Trent, you know, reform had to happen among the clergy. That's why you had all these synods, and you know, Charles Borromeo up there in Milan, and so many others. So I think we need to really encourage our clergy to model the kind of society we'd like. And there's some very simple ways. We have been called by some in our presbyterate tribalized. We have our tribes, our ethnic groups, cultural groups, language groups, and there's not animosity among the different tribes, but there's not a lot of communion. I don't think there's a lot of personal friendship. And I know in my own personal experience that when I have been almost forced in some cases to really break through my own cultural boundaries, like my initial experience with Hispanic ministry, I lived at Maria Goretti always with a Filipino priest, a Vietnamese priest, and a Latino priest for about a dozen years. And then through them, I became more closely connected to their constituencies. And that had such an impact on me, educating me, breaking down my own prejudices and small-mindedness. And so I'd like to see our bishop, for example, at clergy days, days of recollection, give some simple motivations periodically to all of the priests. You know, we all obviously have our close circle of friends, but let's make the conscious effort to break out of our own silos and sit at table, you know, with people from other language groups, other cultural groups. Get to know each other, and we could also facilitate experiences during, say, a clergy study week to get to know each other in a much deeper way. Then we can preach with much more integrity and sincerity the importance of unity among our people. I mean, this was obviously, Jesus was passionate about this. The very last thing he said practically at the Last Supper was, Father, may they all be one as we are one, you know. This is not just some pious hope. You know, this was the passion of Jesus. He came to bring together all God's scattered people. The clergy needs to model this. I'd say start with ourselves, and to really be preaching this and modeling this in our parishes. And then that can have an impact on people outside of our parishes.
This spirit or this potential of bringing unity among the church, as a pastor, I have experienced it like in our celebration of Our Lady of Guadalupe, when you see not only Hispanic people venerating Our Lady of Guadalupe, but you see Filipinos. I remember last year I saw Vietnamese people coming, bringing flowers to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I think what did it for me was when Father Gabriel, who is Korean, came to celebrate a Mass in Spanish, and at the end, grita, Viva la Virgen de Guadalupe! And I think to me that it's a beautiful, we are not there yet. You are right, you are not there yet, but I think we are already experiencing this beauty. Is beautiful. I think our diocese is beautiful because of the multi-ethnic, multicultural church that we are, and each one of them brings so much to our church. There's so much richness in our diversity. And so I just think right now what comes to mind is I was listening to you, it's just the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It is a very powerful symbol of unity within the church. And the other thing about that I like about the diocese is, for example, the friendship that has, for example, I'm Mexican and you and I have been friends for so many years, and you are Caucasian, and I have Father Chen, who is Vietnamese, very good friend of mine, And I think this is what the church offers. That what is important really is our faith in Jesus Christ, who brings us together.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Father
pleasure.
Kevin, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.